Welcome back to Raised by Giants Illuminated Insights discussion. We are live, and I got my famous Hawaiian Shane the Ruiner shirt on. So you know it's going to be a good show. It's going to be lit with returning co-host Shane the Ruiner. How's it going, brother?
Another day in paradise.
That's right, baby. And we have an amazing show for you guys here tonight. A lot to cover. And a reminder, super chats and super stickers are available. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description as well and are a great way to help support the show. So where we're going to start off with today, Shane, is there's this documentary that I really didn't know anything about, right? I'd only heard people mention it within the secret space program and the super soldier community, and that documentary is called Alternative 3, and it came out in 1977 and a book in I believe 1978 the following year. And this documentary was really responsible for a lot of the nonsense that's been continuously perpetuated in this community, like colonies on Mars, people being abducted and taken to the moon and Mars. Had you ever heard of this documentary until recently, Shane?
No, actually, you sent me that video. Like I've been looking for. There's almost like a missing link, right? Because by the time I came into it, everything was already on the internet. So I was really just looking at the progression of it from the time it hit the internet. But I knew that it started somewhere before that with, kind of what I had in my memory was some type of fictional material that was very fictional, but people believed was real. And, before the internet, when we couldn't really fact check, it was a lot easier to sell people on nonsense, right? So, it can start locally, like say a town, and then that turns into a city, and the next thing you know, someone flies overseas and tells some people about it, and it spreads that way. But because it's spreading that way, nobody ever has a time to check up on it, right? To fact check it, basically. And it becomes like a lore that propagates. And so that had happened, and then people start hearing that lore and they start adding on to it and creating their own. And by the time it hit the internet, that it was already had a pretty, a good, 20-30 year head start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm starting to believe that it's not even a simulation like how you theorized in the beginning with these super soldiers and the secret space program asset whistleblowers. I think it's just regurgitated nonsense that really started with this Alternative 3 fake documentary that was presented as a real documentary and then later published as a book by not even the original people that created the documentary, right? And a shout out to Weird Reads with Emily Louise, because she put a fantastic documentary detailing all of this information. I just wanted to mention her really quick because it's definitely important. And she put together this amazing documentary that really details all of this stuff. And I had no idea about it. I'd only heard people like Laura. I'd heard Laura Eisenhower mention Alternative 3 before. I'd heard what's his name, Dr. Michael Sala mention Alternative 3, and then there was Captain Randy Kramer. Randy Cream Pie is what I call him. He mentioned it as well before in previous interviews. But the thing about it is that it was marketed as a real documentary, right? And then the book was sold as a real book, a nonfiction book. So I would imagine it was pretty confusing for people back then, right?
Well, we have a more modern example with the Blair Witch Project, where, I don't know if you remember that. You're a little bit younger than me, but when that came out, people thought it was real. People thought it was real found footage of a real incident that people put together, right? And that snowballed. And unless you found out that it wasn't, it was just a very clever viral marketing scheme, which is what it was, right? Like they had a whole website up. Excuse me. That's another thing people forget about the early days of the internet. Anyone could put up websites, right? You could just put up anything. It didn't have to be, verified in anything, and everything looked real because we didn't have any frame of reference for what a fake or phony or fake news website would look like, right? This was all new to everybody. So a lot of people were discovering these websites and going, "Oh, this has got to be real. It's on the web." right? Just like people would say, it's on the TV, right? So, yeah, with Blair Witch, it was a good example of how, unless you really looked into it, you didn't know that it wasn't real, right? And a lot of the movie was out and people were seeing the movie in theaters. And, we had the stories at the time, people were passing out in theaters, having heart attacks, like all kinds of nonsense going on because people believed it was real. And it was believed that it was real because it was marketed as if it were real, just like Alternative 3.
And if I'm remembering correctly, too, Paranormal Activity also did that same type of thing as well. The very first Paranormal Activity, it was like a found footage movie that seemed really real. People didn't know if it was actually real. And then in the beginning, they did that thing where they were like inspired by true events, which got everybody hooked in. Like I was pretty young whenever it came out. I was kind of like, oh no, this is real. It's wild. There's Ouija boards being set on fire and proof in existence of paranormal entities and all that, So I can see where it, came into that in the marketing scheme of it. But I mean, I'm just going to read a little synopsis of the Alternative 3 fake documentary that came out in 1977, which it describes a plan to make the moon and Mars habitable in the event of climate change and an environmental catastrophe on Earth, right? And the fake documentary begins by detailing a number of mysterious disappearances and deaths of scientists, engineers, astronomers, and other people in related fields. Among the strange deaths reported was that of Professor Ballantyne, right? Before his death, Ballantyne had delivered a videotape to a friend in the press, but upon playback, the tape appears to contain only static. The missing scientists are revealed to have been involved in a secret American-Soviet plan to abduct people and take them to Mars and the moon. And that interplanetary space travel had been possible for way longer than commonly accepted, right? And they have a fictional Apollo space astronaut in the fake documentary claiming that he stumbled onto a mysterious lunar base during his moonwalk, and then is then revealed in the fictional movie that during the 1950s, scientists had secretly determined that the Earth's surface would be unable to support life for much longer due to pollution, and that pollution would then lead to a catastrophe due to climate change. Then in 1957, psychiatrist Dr. Carl Gernstein, I think was his name, which was a fictional doctor, right, in the fake documentary, proposed three solutions, right? The first was a drastic reduction of the human population on Earth. Where have we heard that one before, right? That one's like something that's always tossed around in this community. The second was a construction of a vast underground shelters that house government officials and cross section of the population until the climate had stabilized. And that solution was also, I believe, at the end of Doctor Strangelove, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick as well. So the Alternative 3 plan was said to have been secretly undertaken and was the secret, ultra mega secret colonization of Mars via a way station on the moon.
Yeah, and had all the elements and all the terminology that exists to this day existed in that. And in Emily's documentary there on it, she talks to the author and presents him with the reality that there's a whole community of people who believe that your story is very, very real. And his reaction is pretty priceless, to be honest.
Yeah, and then it wraps up at the end of the documentary. Hold on just a second. Hound Dog with coming through with a $20 super sticker. Thanks so much, Hound Dog, for your kindness and generosity and support of the show. At the end of the documentary, which is the big mother shot here, it ends with, we see a landing on Mars, right, in this documentary. But the camera focuses as the ship is landing on Mars to an unknown organism moving under the surface of the ground. according to the astronaut, which states in the fake documentary, "We are in Mars, and we have life." Right, so that was taken as real and later parodied through the entire community. It's where all this stuff comes from. This was the start of all of the secret space program nonsense. And then also the reporters, this Grudon character, learns that they had to get like a special decoding device after, and then they located the decoder, and then the video documents a joint American and Soviet landing on Mars in 1962.
Yep. And then conveniently, it was like almost plagiarized by the Montauk Chronicles. And, because it was real, it was referenced as real. A lot of other speakers. And remember, before the internet, this was all being done in conferences or in people's houses or in library basements or maybe a bar that someone rented out or a conference hall or something like this, right? We didn't have the internet. So it was very easy for these speakers to move between places and perpetuate these myths, perpetuate these stories. And, I know how it works now where everyone gets together behind the scenes and make sure that the story is kind of seamless, right? And they're not stepping on each other's toes. You don't think that was also true when there was a lot fewer people and a lot fewer groups, and it was a lot easier for them to have done that? Of course it did. And it's obvious because they all kept using the same words, right? And then as you watch the alternative community grow, the gatekeepers ended up being the last person to come up with a story, vetting the person before them, right? And just psychologically how this worked on the audience, you would assume, because we're used to journalism, that like sources were being checked and people were being properly vetted when their stories came out, and even characters were being referenced and things like that, or determined, judged. And that's not, we know now in hindsight, definitely not the case, right? It's one of the things that I kind of famously drew out in one of my Project Camelot interviews, that they don't do that they just kind of talk to anybody, right? And before that, it was like, oh, okay, you're on that show, you're real. And that was the attitude that people had, right? And that's going back 10 years ago now. So if you think of how much, time has sped up in terms of how much this stuff has grown, right? Like, well, what I mean is, like, it's grown exponentially. It's gathered momentum over time. It hasn't slowed down. But if you go roll it all the way back to about that time, you can just see this perfect progression. And just take what you would learn watching that documentary that, like Ryder said, and thank you for sending it to me, brother. I really appreciate it. It's the first time I've watched something like that in years, but it was definitely worth the time because she did such a great job of putting it all in order. This is how it rolled out. This person came after this person, and this person came after that person. Same thing that I've run through many times with these super soldiers and whistleblowers, and the way that it works behind the scenes, where there's even a great example of it. And, I'll kind of call myself out on this because I support Duncan O'Finian, but if you go back to that original Camelot interview, you can see where leading questions start happening. Right? Like, if I want to know your experience, I want you to just tell it to me. Whereas if I want to know something specific, I'm going to lead you with a question, such as, hey, have you ever been to Mars? Right? So, yeah, you can see that even within his interview that happened, and then just even the way that he responds to it. This is what happens. You almost feel like you have to go along with it. Right? We see it in political parties all the time where I don't really agree with that, but my side says that that's cool. So I guess I have to go along with it. The way that these conferences are put together, they kind of have to be able to go along and complement and accent each other. Otherwise, they don't get invited to the next one, right? Put that all together, and we are like 30 years deep in a soup. And it's,
even longer. I mean, there was stuff before this, and before this documentary came out in 1977, which there was this radio science fiction anthology series called Dimension X in 1950, where the premise was that an employee of the United States Bureau of Missing Persons overhears a radio broadcast from a man who claims to be held prisoner on the moon, right? And uncovers the kidnapping of many persons, including scientists and engineers, who are then forced to live on the moon by German overseers, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back even, that one was in 1950, and then you go back to the Unarius Society called in 1954 with Ernest Newman here that I covered last week, right? Where he claimed that he traveled psychically to Mars and seen underground caverns, right? And he wrote a book called The Truth About Mars. And this came out and it was written in 1956, where Ernest claims in this book, get this, Shane, this is a doozy right here, that the Chinese evolved from an ancient interstellar race of migrants who began colonizing Mars 1,000,000 years ago, right? That they are reported to have returned to Mars, where they now live in underground cities after being attacked by natives of Earth, right? And this group split off from this other Asian group on Mars and separated and didn't return. And this is how we get all the different Asian races on Earth.
Yeah, there's always a racial quality to all of this, right? Like it's always tied in there somehow, whether it's you know, people being extremely anti-Semitic and us all just going, well, I didn't hear it, you know, or you know, the various types of you know, superiority complexes that people bring forward with this, like even the talk of like bloodlines and everything like that. Like it's all about this being special, being better than everyone else because we are the originals, or we come from this place which is better than that place. And it's always tied into these stories as well. And I mean, yeah, you're right that it's not even just the secret space program and that, because this has been going back with like even if you get back into like theosophy, right? And fuck, what was that woman? Sorry, for my language, that woman's name, Helena Blavatsky.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. That one. Edgar Casey as well. The Law of One. All of these things. It's all just piggybacking on top of each other. You know, Corey Good was an easy example, right? But you know, that he's not the first, and a lot. I still have the number at like 98.9% of this community at this point in time has been built on that same nonsense, basically, right? And even if new points have been added, or valid true points, sorry, not new points, but over time, truth has come in, right? There was some truth at the beginning. There's always been little slivers of truth, but it's that amount of bullshit that gets added in the middle, right? And if you watch, it's always attached to the ego of the presenter because of how special and unique they are, right? Which should tell us something. I mean, carnival sideshows back in the day kind of work on a very like a circus freak sideshow is what I'm talking about. Kind of work on a very similar type of deception, right?
Yeah, and Emily brings forward in her documentary on her YouTube channel about Bill Cooper, which I found very interesting. That he pretty much just copied all of the information from Alternative 3, put his own twist on it and his own spin on it, and then became really popular. And it's which Bill Cooper is who this community holds in most high regard for all of their theories, not knowing that all of his theories are based upon the fake documentary and fake book Alternative 3. But what's really interesting about Bill Cooper, I'm going to do a whole series on people that's influenced ufology because I think it's really important. But what's interesting about Bill Cooper was before he died, he basically was talking about how extraterrestrials don't exist, that it's not extraterrestrials. Then he was murdered. He was shot several times by authorities, and he wanted to get out of the UFO community because he realized that it was a bunch of nonsense. and they shot and
Yeah,
killed him.
I've pointed that out many times too, that, you know, he got in trouble when he finally said, wait a second, this isn't being done by aliens, this is being done by people. Right? That's the part that, you know, used to get you killed. Today it just gets you ostracized from this community because nobody wants to hear that, right? But you know, that's the unfortunate reality. You know, we even have disclosures coming out now, and they're not saying what, you know, this just disclosure community said that they're supposed to be saying, right? They're saying that we might have recovered something and there might have been something attached to that. That's a very far cry from, you know, the reality that they would no longer be able to hide. And that was why I gave the date of like 2018, because that was being generous. Like by the time technology got to where we are at, like you can't get away with this nonsense. Look at how quickly we can debunk things these days, right? Like didn't we do talk about one last time on last time we got together in Vegas there? Like,
Yep.
right? So you know, the pictures that people are circulating about the direct energy weapons starting a fire recently that are just time-lapse rocket launches, right? It's we're doing it to ourselves, and we've always done that. And you know, people ask me a lot of the time why I can get away with saying what I say. It's because nobody's going to listen, because it's not what people want to hear, right? It's not, oh yeah, they've got a million underground bases full of aliens, and the aliens are really, you know, they're hybridizing us, they're trying to terraform with their slaving us on Mars. Like this isn't what I'm saying, and nobody wants to hear it. So, but
Yeah.
you can see, you know, if you do want to take an honest look at it, you can see where this all started, and it's you know, spirituality started doing it, and that just segued into ufology as well. And I maintained that, you know, the agenda was presented to us in the X-Files. It's all to divert our attention away from what humans are doing, so that we will blame aliens and never ever be able to catch and blame or catch and punish the people that we claim do it, because, you know, they're fucking aliens.
Yep. Nothing you can do about super ultra mega advanced aliens, right? They're way too advanced for us to do anything about. But human beings, that's a different story, right? Which is another interesting thing with the Unarius Academy occult that I covered last week in my UFO Doomsday Cult episode 5 was Ruth Norman. Here, well, I don't have a picture of her. I don't know. I got so many pictures printed out, photographs. Here, hold on. Here she is. Ruth Norman from the Unarius Academy cult. She started channeling a group of beings or people that she called the 33 Worlds of Interplanetary Confederation. Right? Sounds very similar to the Galactic Federation, the Galactic Federation of Light, or the Interplanetary Corporation Federation. You know, it's very difficult to keep track of all these federations and confederations and brotherhoods of light and galactic federations of light. But she started saying that she lived over 200 past lives, right? And one of them was Mary Magdalene, right? People from Atlantis, Lemuria, ancient Egypt. And the interesting aspect of this Unarius Academy cult is it developed into a collective past life together, right? Everyone in the cult then began to believe that they were all a part of the exact same past lives, right? And that they were here acting under the 33 worlds of the Confederation, right? On Earth, and from many other planets throughout the millennia, right? As a part of this 33 worlds of the Galactic Federation, Confederation of Light thing, acting on behalf of them, right? They all basically believed that they were star seeds sent here from the 33 worlds of interplanetary confederation, which is very similar to what the secret space program and super soldiers also believe. They all have developed this collective memory of something that isn't real, that didn't really happen, right?
And it's very easy to influence people. Like when people are coming to you in those states, they're vulnerable, right? They're looking for answers. It's very easy to insert your own personal narrative into them, right? That's how like every cult, and I don't think people understand the amount of cults that are out there, right? So,
Right.
you know, I see Star Trek on the screen. That's another example. I think I pointed this out on the last broadcast, that is the most syndicated TV show ever. That means that it was seen by everyone for years and years and years and years. That was being put into people. You know, if you're walking by TVs, if you're walking by malls that have displays of TVs, you know, Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek being put into it, where the story come from. But, you know, our mind, we have the ability to make ourselves feel whatever we really want to feel, right? Think of a memory, imagine something, think of something that you've been through that was really good. You can start to feel that feeling. You can recreate that feeling. Think of something that's really bad. You can recreate that feeling. You can start to get that feeling too. So, you know, all it takes is for you to have that feeling at the right time and hear the right thing for you to attach that feeling to that thing that you heard, right? And so if you're already coming in, it's like a leading question, but in reverse. If you're coming in looking for a specific answer, you know, this is what charlatan psychics have been doing for forever. It's very easy to take one look at you and give you at least 5 answers that probably make sense to you, right? And if I have a little bit more information because you've just dumped your whole story on me, right, then I could literally tailor this and play that circus sideshow charade with you all day long. And then we say these things like, I resonate with the information. We resonate with any information we want to hear. That's what a resonation is, right? If you're not resonating, then it might be true. Because have you ever heard any truth that you were like, oh, that makes me feel so much better immediately? No, the truth always pisses you off at first or upsets you at first. It's only once you're able to integrate the truth, because you understand that you would rather have truth than a lie, that it sets you free in the end. But at first it doesn't feel good, right? And that's what people are looking for. It's validation of an emotional reality. That's really all it is. And when it comes to subject matter like this that is so unprovable, and we all want to believe it on some level, it's just way too easy to take advantage of vulnerable people and get them to believe whatever you want. And then, you know, the next thing we have characters like James Ring out there doing what he does. James Rink, sorry, out there doing what he does, which has been plenty well exposed by now, but yet people still buy it. It's really quite ridiculous. But that's this community in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like a bunch of different entertainment, but also some really wealthy people have gotten involved. Some really rich people, like in the Order of the Solar Temple cult in Switzerland, with Luke Jure here and Demambro, his partner. Right, they were a very elitist cult that would only accept people that had large amounts of money into their cult, and they incorporated a bunch of different beliefs into their cult. Masonic, it was basically centered around a lot of the Knights Templar, um, I guess I could say mythology, Knights Templar mythology, because I think it's what it is, right? And Masonic rituals. And this dude right here, Demambro, he was using smoke and mirrors during his rituals and during his initiation process to make the followers of the cult believe that he was really in communication with these higher beings. Right? He was using a projector with smoke in order to create an apparition for these cult members, these cult followers, to reinforce their belief into the cult and into the studies that Demambro was telling them.
Well,
That's
yeah,
how far it went.
any of these things have had an incredible amount of hoaxery in them, right? It's like you really have to sift through for the gems that don't have it. I don't know why once the internet came along, people forgot that, right? It's that's the problem, is people, you know, and it seems like people are forgetting it more, even though the technology is becoming more advanced, right? Now that it's easy to deep fake anything, like there's a technology available out there to recreate this conversation and have us like talking, like my voice coming out of his face and his voice coming out of mine, right? Like we're already on that doorstep. So
Yeah.
this isn't going to get easier. It's going to get a lot harder. And if people are already feeling so miserable, I don't have a whole lot of hope for it, to be honest, because, that want to believe is so powerful. And that's how hypnosis works, right? It's like you play on what people expect. It's the same thing NASA says to you when they explain how they Photoshop their images. They're basically Photoshopping it to meet your expectations of what you expect to have the planet Earth look like from space. And that's the same thing all these speakers have been doing too. And if you keep tracing it back, you'll end up finding out that there's some pretty clear origins for these stories. And that's one of those cases. And so my memory of it was always like just that that particular truth community was willing to pick up a piece of fiction and then sell it as if it were real, and we just kind of started laughing at them from there. We've just continued just kind of observing, right? So and then you can very easily attract people who want to make money, right? Because I mean, we already have some staples out there, like Corey's Disposition told us how much money David Wilcock has made and can make.
Millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Off of one course.
Boil that down to someone like Kim Grogan or whatever we call Kim Possible these days, and her making hundreds and 200 and 300 and 400 500 thousands of dollars off of the same community, right? It's ridiculous. And if you don't think that that's an incentive for lying, you're kidding yourself. Right? This is exactly why politicians lie to you. Is exactly why lawyers lie. Or it's exactly why anybody else that you would call a snake would lie. Right? Is in order to gain out of it. And unfortunately, for that particular depth of this community, there's just a lot of people with disposable incomes who want to believe bad enough that they perpetuate this nonsense by throwing hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars at these people, right?
Yeah, it's become a really big problem and a regurgitation of much previous older beliefs, and I've proved it through these through studying all these UFO cults and all the UFO Doomsday Cult videos that I've done. Like Bo here from the Heaven's Gate cult, he's talking about how your belief creates whatever you want it to be, right? That whenever you die, whatever you believe in is where you're going to go, right? That and how many people have we heard regurgitate that through the community? The first person I ever heard talk about that was Jordan Maxwell, and that's not saying anything bad on Jordan Maxwell. I'm just saying that's how easily regurgitated these belief systems are. And every single one of these cults is where all of these regurgitated beliefs come from. It's where it all comes from. And with the secret space program and the super soldier, they've molded and mixed in different ideas, theologies, and beliefs from these cults, mixed in with the alternative 3 material. Then they've created and adapted their own ideology to get everybody else to believe in. And then that's how they just create more people that supposedly had all of these experiences, just like what's her face from the Unarius cult, Ruth from the Unarian cult, right? That's what she did. She started having all of these past life regressions from the 33 Interplanetary World Confederation, and then all of a sudden, all of her followers started having all of these past lives resurface too, right? That's not just a coincidence. That's an egregore. She just created an egregore, and then everyone else feeded their energy into what she believed, and then they all, in return, also believed it, even though it's made up nonsense.
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't know that Emily's going to ever watch this, but this is how easy it is, and we've talked about it before. I mean, I watched that documentary, and that night in my dream, I had a really long conversation with Emily about grifters. Didn't really happen. We weren't really on some remote island having this wicked conversation about this stuff. I was influenced because of something that I watched. And then my dreams, my subconscious latched onto it and created this dream for me. Or I could believe that I'm recovering a memory, whichever is, Emily and I were both in projects together, and she just doesn't remember it yet, and it's my job to unlock that memory. No, but that's the games that are being played here, and I get it. someone I know recently got into Magic the Gathering, the card game, and I was listening to him being taught about the game. And you know what I could not stop thinking about was the Montauk Boys. Like, this is what you guys have done. It's Dungeons and Dragons without the cards and without the dice. And yeah, you're
It's
just
created a
making
LARP. It's one giant LARP.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see it right in, Preston. Like, you can see it, like, just listen to the man talk, watch his body language, read the book, right? Listen to what he says. It's not real, and it's just really sad that it ever got this far. That that such a thing even can exist, right? It's it should be unthinkable.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. And what would be the midnight podcast? I am trying to keep track of the chat, but it's kind of difficult. Still haven't got the hang of doing the chat and doing the show at the same time. I'm a one-man operation here, but it's difficult to really sift through a lot of the nonsense that's been perpetuated within the community. And I've even gotten some pushback from people just covering these UFO cults and presenting the facts, right? Like, one person was, because the Seekers UFO cult in 1953, I think we already mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. The Seekers UFO cult in 1953, there was a gentleman, a psychiatrist, that infiltrated that cult called Leon Fetzinger. And whenever he infiltrated that cult, he studied their psychology and what they would do after each one of their predictions would fail, right? And he developed the term cognitive dissonance. That's where the term cognitive dissonance comes from. It's from a psychologist studying a UFO cult, right? And there was people that gave me pushback. I'm like, go get on the internet and look it up, just like I did. Do some research, and you can see that that's where the term came from. Cognitive dissonance came from the studying of a UFO cult. But their butt hurt because they've turned around and used that cognitive dissonance term to the people that, like the sheep and the NPCs and the people that aren't a part of this community. They're using, they just have cognitive dissonance. All the while, that term was created for them.
Yeah, well, it means what it means, and it can be true on either side, right? And it is true on both sides. And that's the point here, is that, and this is why it's a problem, because all of these, when this was all starting, the message was always like, kind of like we're preparing so that when all of this stuff starts to come out, we can be the ambassadors, we can be the ground crew, we can be the people who help transition everyone into this new knowing, right? But unfortunately, you guys took it too far, and now those people who are coming in are seeing what you guys are saying and going, okay, but that's nonsense. So why should I believe all the other stuff that you say? It's the same thing as like the excuse I get about QAnon. Look at all the people that woke up. Yeah, and look at the lawsuit. Look at all the people in jail now because of it, right? Which would you prefer? So you woke up a few people. You put a bunch more people in jail. Congratulations. And then, or sharing those direct energy weapon photos yesterday, right? Well, I believe that they're really direct energy levels weapons, so it doesn't matter if that photo is fake. It absolutely matters that that photo is fake, right? Even if that is what you believe, especially if that's what you believe. If you really believe it, then you don't want to share fake information to support your conclusion. You want to share real information to support your conclusion. And with all these topics that we've been talking about, there is a lot of truth in a lot of them, right? But unfortunately, as we keep trying to point out, because this lore has been just burying all that truth, we're putting all of our fingers in the wrong place, and we're not getting anywhere. How long has it been? Where have we gotten? We've done more harm than we've done good, which is supposed to be the opposite of what we're doing here, right? So those facts have to matter, and we do have to.
Emily, I can say whatever I want. This is my show. I can say right after every single word if I want to say right after every single word. Shane can say right after every single word if he wants to say right after every single word. I can do what I want. I want to see your show. You don't have a profile picture on your YouTube channel. I bet you don't have any videos or any followers on your YouTube channel either. So if you don't like it, then leave. Go ahead, Shane. Sorry.
Well, I mean, yeah, as we go through these things and we start to find out that some of the things that we previously believed were not true, we should reconsider the whole of our belief structure. Left.
Left. Yep. You're totally left. Definitely left right now. No, and I agree with that so much, and I think that what I've been watching this show called, I mentioned to you about it earlier, and it's kind of a really deep topic left, and it's called Under the Dome. It's on Paramount Plus, and it's originally a novel written by Stephen King, and they made a TV series out of it. And there's a point in the show where at the end of season 2, they're put into these like pods, right? And they're made to live out a holographic simulation. And that simulation was so real to them that they didn't realize that they were in a holographic projected simulation. But then I was thinking, well, what if we are in a holographic projected simulation? Then how deep does that holographic simulation go? If they were in one in the movie, and then also what they were representing was also a holographic simulation, then that would be a simulation within a simulation, right? Then I'm like racking my brain. I'm like, holy shit, we might be in a simulation within a simulation here. And this is a holographic projected reality, which I know that you have talked about several times. I think we even talked about it the first time that I ever brought you on my show around 2 years ago, but it's something I've looked at it with different eyes by getting a visual representation of it. And what they went through in this fictional show was very damaging to them because they loved that holographic simulation. That holographic simulation was giving them everything that they wanted. They were now outside of the dome. They no longer had to be inside of the dome, but it was all fake and contrived.
That was part of the Matrix as well, right? With Cypher, as an example, he wanted to go back in. He just preferred that. Agent Smith kind of tells Morpheus that story of how if we made this perfect, you would reject it and wake up from it, right? And Morpheus also says something to the same effect of people are dependent on this system and they will fight to defend it, right? That's cognitive dissonance, right? Like that's what that is. It's that, facts conflicting with a belief system and not being able to reconsider your belief system in the process. And what I've seen is that happening over and over again, where even though they see what they previously believed is incorrect, instead of making amends, apologizing, accepting, owning it, they just pivot off of it and almost pretend like it just completely didn't exist. It didn't happen. I didn't do that. It's like they're gaslighting themselves out of their own behavior. So a very strange phenomenon, but it's caused by the same thing cognitive dissonance is. And that's why I said it's on this side of it too.
Yeah, and can the simulation and the projection be so sophisticated? Okay, so I had this thought and this theory too while watching Under the Dome as well, like, because a lot of the people that got out of that simulation that was created for them outside of the dome to make them think that they had escaped the dome, they came back with a lot of the experiences and the ideas and the thoughts that they had acquired from that simulation. So this is just hyperbole and theorizing and stuff here right now, right? So could you go through a simulation and live out a life, exit that simulation, come back to this life, and then take the things that you needed from that life, all the experiences and all the thoughts and the ideas you had from living out that life, come back and then remember them and then have them help you out in this life, right? Would that
Absolutely.
not make sense? You could live thousands of years within an hour or a couple of hours
They
in
kind of
this
skip
reality.
over it in the Matrix movies, but even if you think of, like, when they would plug him in and they would teach him martial arts, of us watching him sit in the chair, all we get to see is like, oh, I know kung fu, right? But during that period, he's actually training kung fu, right? So that could take however long. Maybe he learned it all in 3 years. But that's still 3 years within a simulation, summed up that quickly. And that's what I've said about the programs I saw were all of these very elaborate, very convincing realities that weren't real, just to test your reaction to them. And even though it seemed like 6 months, a year, you know, or theoretically 20 years, it was really only about 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour or something to that effect. You weren't actually doing that. But like I said, our brain does not know how to tell the difference between a false memory and a real one, right? So even if I were to actually hypnotize you with your consent, plant a false memory, you would not be able to tell the difference between the false memory and one of your real ones. It would feel the same, right? That's how potent these simulations are. Anyone who's kind of following the Neuralink development, just reverse engineer what they're doing, right? Just do what they're doing, but in reverse, taking all those signals and taking them out and then having an outcome determined on those signals. Instead, what they're doing is they're putting those signals in so that things will respond, right? But just imagine taking them out and then seeing what that response would be. That's what these were for. And I believe that the nature of the universe is holographic to begin with. And like anyone who listens to me talk, I fully believe that we are in some type of machine simulation right now. But in terms of that type of simulation, we're going to see it very soon. There's a movie called Other Life, I think. It's a low budget movie, but it shows you how, this technology could be used. You could send someone to prison for 10 years in a weekend, as an example. To them, they spent 10 years in prison, right? Their mind, their emotions, the trauma that they incurred, everything would be just like they spent 10 years in prison. But in here, this time, it only took a weekend, right? That's how malleable our memories and our brains and how powerful our emotions attached to them are. So.
Yeah, and I thought that maybe it could be used in a good way, like I was mentioning, like you could live several lives like in a very short amount of time, and maybe some people have done that. Right? And I think that it could be possible. Obviously, there's no evidence and no proof of it actually happening. But then the question would be to become, how would you keep yourself from not going crazy? Like, how would you keep your mind intact and be able to decipher and disseminate all of that different information? I mean, I have a difficult time keeping track and a good memory of all the things that I know and all the things that I've researched, especially with dates and stuff. Everyone has problems with remembering dates and things.
Yeah.
But if you were to live several lives like that in the same life, then that would become very difficult, I believe.
Me too. And through experience, it is, right? Like you end up, even just within your lifetime, you've probably noticed that it's not like you've completely forgotten things, but they're not at the surface of your memory anymore, right? Stories you would tell on a regular basis 10 years ago, you probably don't tell as frequently anymore. You tell different ones. And those ones that you used to tell are further back in your memory. I would have to say something almost to jog that memory out of you. Well, again, just put more volume into that. And of course, it would get ridiculously difficult. Um, you know, getting into cosmology and stuff, I think that's why people reincarnate, because memory starts to get fuzzy after a few thousand years. But it's much easier to almost like dumping your cache or dumping everything off to a hard drive, so you can come in with a nice fresh slate and gather more. But that's getting a little into the weeds. But that is correct, right? Is the memory would overlap. It would be on top, like it would be a lot of volume. And something I've always said about that is, if you've been through that experiences develop character and they develop knowledge. And so if you're going to go through those experiences, you're going to come back with that character and that knowledge as well, right? And in a positive way, like kind of what we were kind of talking about there, that's going to be one of the positive uses of this type of technology, is that people could like do their schooling in a couple days. Like you could learn really complicated stuff that takes long periods of time in a short amount of time. And if you were to design those simulations so that there wasn't a lot of extra fluff, kind of like what you see in like Black Mirror's episodes where they go to space during the day and then they come back to their other body at night, right? Imagine setting up an education system that worked that way, where a kid could literally do their whole schooling in a few months, but the 8 hours of the day that they're in school to them is almost like a whole year, right? or whatever. I'm just throwing numbers around, but that would be a practical application of it. But you are correct in that our memory and the amount of volume that it can hold varies from person to person. I don't think it's necessarily how much it can hold, but how much we can actively retrieve is kind of a problem, and why we rely on computers for the most part.
Yeah, then that brings into the question of reincarnation. Are we being reincarnated back into the exact same time cycle every time? And that is the trap that everyone has regurgitated and talked about in this community forever. Even I have talked about this reincarnation trap. Well, what if it's not necessarily a trap? It's like a cycle, and we keep getting thrown back into this cycle every time.
Yeah, it's funny that you're bringing this up, not knowing that like I have a whole series on this, but it's that's what I believe. I think that we've got this 13,000 year loop that we're on the 6th run through, and that's why a lot of these things feel so familiar. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, like a video game plus, like Mario Brothers Plus or something like that, where you beat the game, but then you can start right back at the beginning of the game with like the knowledge of the game, right?
Yeah.
That could be a possibility. I always like to give people the analogy of it being just like playing a video game. And it could be like, even though we're talking to each other on Zoom in here, where we exist outside of here, we're just both sitting on the same couch being like, hey, dude, we should do a podcast, like something like that could be going on. But yeah, I mean, I have my own view on things because of everything that I've taken in over time. Everybody kind of does. I don't know anyone who knows for absolute sure how everything absolutely works in that degree, but there's things that I say confidently, like reincarnation is real. Your soul exists outside of this lifetime. It's going to experience billions of them on all sorts of different planets all over the place, and this is just a small fraction of that. Why that's all going on, I got no fucking idea. But it's a lot more fun than we make it out to be when we're playing the human game. Some people like to watch horror movies, some people don't. I'm not a big fan of rom-coms, but I'll watch one. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I am coming to that conclusion that maybe it's a loop, and that whenever we get to a certain point in this holographic projection of reality that we think is real reality, it then gets reset or it gets destroyed, and then we start it over again, whether that's a physical destruction or a physical death and then reincarnation, rebirth, which could be looked at as like a destruction and then a rebirth as an individual, not only like a collective destruction rebirth, but I think people have the wrong idea about a bunch of different things. And if they would look at it a little more deeper, they would realize that it's not what it seems. That it's not so much as it's not a collective rebirth, it's a individual rebirth.
I think it's kind of starts with the individual and then echoes out bigger, right? Like you're talking about cycles, there's like, you know, the cycle maybe of the simulation as a whole, or like that loop that I think that we're on. But even within that 13,000 year loop, there's cycles, right? Cycles of civilization, cycles within a person's own development on an individual level, cycles of nature that come into play, cycles of the cosmos, if you will, that come into play. All of these like cycles within the cycles, almost like different gears within a clock. But really what we look at is the face of the clock, right? That tells us the time. We're not looking through that to see all the little gears that are, we don't pay attention to them. As long as they're working properly, we're happy because we just want to be able to tell the time. So I think that's kind of similar too, in terms of like the global world. But, you know, I think that it starts with our individual reality, and then that kind of echoes out into a collective that we all do share. And, you know, that's why when I'm trying to explain it to people, it's like, we get taught that perception is reality. I think we have our own kind of perceptual reality that's like this ball, and then we all share the collective reality, which is this ball. And my little ball here influences this big ball, but it's almost like a vote, almost like a democracy. And I think at the end of the day, the consciousness of the planet is the thing that makes up its mind as to how things go. But we're getting way into the weeds, just kind of speculating or giving you my own cosmology on things. But yeah, just to tie it all back into, you know, a simulated reality isn't any different to the mind than a non-simulated reality, right? Unless something tips you off that it's a simulation, you're going to continue to think that it's real. And yeah, I think
But
that the
is
more
thinking that it's real necessarily a bad thing?
I mean, it depends, right? Like situationally, overall, I would say probably not, right? Because really, what is experience? It should be what you take from it. So if I take something from a simulation that I plugged myself into in the metaverse, or I take something from, you know, going for a walk with a girl, like what's the difference? I've experienced something that I've taken from, right? I've gained knowledge, I've bettered myself, I've done whatever with it. So yeah, I mean, is there a difference?
Thanks so much, Hound Dog, for the $5 super sticker. Thanks so much for your kind and generous support of the show, brother. Thanks so much. Appreciate you. So I guess the question that I really want to get to is, are we stuck in this simulation? Is this simulation permanent?
Nothing's permanent. So no. Stuck is kind of relative. Like I'm stuck in this chair until we decide to end this podcast, right? Yeah, that'd be one way to term it, right? Like we are both stuck doing this podcast until the podcast ends. Sure. But do you feel stuck? Not necessarily, right? Like that's not how we perceive what we're doing. So again, it would come down to the perception. Do you feel stuck, or is this just a different type of experience, right? Be like, I don't like rom-coms, but I'll watch one. Right? It's just the same type of thing. Am I stuck watching the rom-com? Not so much. And I think overall, I know I'm kind of making fun, but I know your bigger question of just like, is this some type of prison that we're stuck in? I've never believed that. I think that there are a lot of traps set into place that might convince us that we are, and that belief that we are can play out as reality because we will make decisions that lead us right back here. But I don't think overall that anything can ever trap a soul in any sort of way. I've seen that experiment fail more times than I could put in a number. So I don't believe that.
So would the goal be to get out of this holographic projected simulation, or to stay in the holographic projected simulation and learn?
Personally, it's experience, right? So I would say we chose to be here. We must have our own reasons for doing that. And so yeah, I think that I would say stay, but I'm not everybody, right? I do believe that if we've chosen to be here, then that indicates that we want this experience at some level, even if we can't remember why we want it right now.
Chosen to be here sounds like a bunch of new age gobbledygook, Shane. What do
Well,
you mean chosen to be here? You think we got a contract, a divine contract from God and our higher selves and our
not exactly, not exactly. And there's like, it's almost like, if you agree to play hockey or any sport with a group of guys, you're all agreeing not to actually try to hurt each other, but you could accidentally hurt each other, right? Or there could be some asshole on the team who decides to hurt someone. But the game was set up with the agreement that people were just not going to do that, right? So, you kind of do it at your own risk. I think that there's a certain element to this life that is that. Everyone being able to maintain free will means that violations will happen, and unfortunate reality. But again, I don't think this is much more than a video game or a movie, anyways. So, I don't mean to be insensitive. Obviously, some of these movies are fucking terrible, and people shouldn't have to go through them. But I do trust that there's something better on the other side of it all. So.
yeah, there's this lady that I'm covering. It's called the Love Has One cult that I'm covering next week.
Oh Jesus, you poor bastard! What?
Ooh,
You know that they started as that was the Galactic Federation. Right?
yes, it
She
is a
spun,
rabbit hole, dude.
yeah, and she spun off because she's crazy, right? And and that's what's happened with Galactic Federation. It started as one, and now they're like what? I've lost track of how many they are, but that's where that ended more often than not. Great example. That was one that because she died not that long ago. There was actually like it was on the news and stuff, so people found out about it.
Huge
But yeah.
investigation, yeah. Yep, and people got charged for because apparently I don't want to spoil it for people, but it's very, very interesting. It goes down so many different rabbit holes, and it'll be coming up next week on UFO Doomsday Cults, Part 6, and it goes off the rails. Like this lady has literally, it's the perfect example of a cult burrito, right? It's exactly like a conspiracy burrito, but it's a cult burrito.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect example. She just combines all of it. She just throws it in there that she's the reincarnation of God here in the flesh, that the experiment of free will is over, and that she's here to ascend people into the 5D portal in the sun, just like all kinds of that she's had over 500 reincarnations of different people on the planet. It's nuts. And it happened right here in Colorado. Welcome to the show has a question. He says, consciousness of the planet. Did you mention consciousness of the planet?
Yeah, so I think my own cosmology or my own belief system is that the universe is a conscious being as a whole. Each solar system, each planet, all of that, you could think of them like a different organ within that whole. And then we would be kind of like the gut biome running around on one of those organs within that idea. So I believe that the universe is conscious as a being as itself. We are all kind of fragments of that. And the planets, each individual planet is also a conscious being as well that is kind of creating its own experience that we cast votes on by incarnating within. So yeah, I believe that this planet is conscious, and that answers that question.
If anybody's got any questions for Shane, we're going to wrap it up here soon. Get them in, and I will try and get them asked to Shane. Annie, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Lost in Space, what's going on, my friend? Without consciousness, would anything exist?
I don't believe so. I think that that's where we get into artificial spaces, right? It's like an artificial life form, if you will, is that it doesn't have that. And I don't think that, not to say that we haven't created artificial life forms within this conscious life form that we call the universe, but I think the point is consciousness, if that makes any sense. Probably doesn't, but
GG, what's going on, GG? Good to see you. I know my past lives don't need anyone or anything else to tell me who I was. That's exactly right. Don't
like
fall for people telling you that you were the galactic ambassador from planet Lyra.
Or like I could come along and throw a whole bunch of wrenches in that for you by telling you that I recognize you from all of these different places and that you were this and you were that, because a lot of people like to do gross things like that. It's called grooming, for the record.
Kid Shiva with a $5 super chat. Thanks so much for your kindness and generosity and support of the show. Thanks for hosting a great new conversations. Philip K. Dick highlights all of what has been spoken about. The simulation isn't permanent.
I like it. I like it.
Yes, yes. Thanks so much, Kid Shiva.
Philip K. Dick's writings have been very influential in a lot of our mythos as well.
On UFOs, Philip K. Dick?
Yeah, like even the Matrix topic, like a lot of different topics he wrote about, right? That feed into the alt community.
No bold truth with conspiracy theorists are fast swimmers, so we were born more frequently. Yeah, I thought that it was interesting too in that documentary about Kenneth Arnold as well, and how he contributed to the UFO craze, because he really was the first person that spoke about seeing some unidentified craft. Now, what he saw, I think, was human technology, wasn't extraterrestrial technology, but that's really what started the whole flying saucers. That's where that came from, was Kenneth Arnold saying that he saw things that looked like flying saucers that would move across water, right? And then they developed that entire term out of what he said, and then flying saucers became like a craze on like newspaper articles and then books, and everyone started calling it flying saucers, which is wild.
And within the like artwork, ancient artwork and stuff too, like there's a lot of paintings that people speculate that this like weird thing in the sky is meant to be a UFO, but more often than not, those were meant to be comets and different processions of the planets in the sky meant to determine dates because they didn't have calendars, right? So like to be able to say that this was meant to like the Star of Bethlehem as an example.
Oh, right? Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. That was actually from a gentleman, I think, a preacher in either California or Texas that was saw a weird shape of UFO. Then he went through the Bible and then started decoding the Bible and then creating a bunch of theories that the Star of Bethlehem was a UFO. There's a few other cults that also mentioned that the Star of Bethlehem was a UFO. I'd have to go back and research it, but I covered it in my series. Tomfoolery, who's the cult leader? He's talking. Well, the three that I talked about was in this video was Luke Juray and Demambro here from the Order of the Solar Temple cult, Bo from the Heaven's Gate cult, and this gentleman here. Forget, I'm blanking on his name right now. Ernest Newman from the Unarius Academy cult. Those are the ones that I mentioned in this video. GG says, so essentially X is now Twitter, the cube.
Well, the X, specifically the way he designed the X, if you invert them, then it makes the square and compass perfectly, which I think is pretty interesting. X marks the spot people know as like a treasure hunting type term. What fucking movie was that? Oh, it was one of the Indiana Jones movies where it was talking about it actually being 10 and the countdown of Revelations, right? So you could interpret as X as the mark of the beast if you wanted to, but probably not.
Well, he wants to turn it into an everything app, from what I've been hearing in the research that I've done.
He wants to turn it into a cube, actually, yeah. So she's on the right track for sure.
Hound dog is space plasma. This is a huge topic, but if you can try and squeeze it in really quick.
Yeah, I don't believe space is maybe I don't know what to call it, to be honest. I don't know that we would have a matter for it, because I think that everything is holographic. Like I think that we're really, the universe itself is like some kind of conscious computer system, if you will, that's creating all these holographic projections. And but what the space between each one of those projections would be, I'm not even sure that it would be really space. So I don't know that plasma is the right word. Anytime I've heard people talk about the technology for passing through it, they've really said that it's a much more like water than what we consider it to be space, right?
Thanks so much for your kindness and generosity of a super uh, sticker of the question, Hound Dog. Appreciate you a lot. The Midnight Pod. I don't know what Midnight Podcast is saying. Hey, Gandalf the White. I guess he's calling you Gandalf the White. You must be a space wizard, Shane. My question is, do you want to play the game? I have no idea what that means, unless Shane, you're in on this. If
I'm
you know
not
what he's
sure.
talking about.
Does that say the Midnight Podcast? I don't know that I've heard of your podcast. Sorry, but if you're asking me if I want to come on your show, then sure. I'm always willing to talk to people. Shane.Sador, name's on the screen there, 777@gmail.com.
I'm kind of far back on the questions here. All right, I think that's it. I think that's all we got. And is there anything else that you wanted to mention, Shane?
Not really. Be careful when it comes to comparison photos and claiming that people are clones and they're shooting us with direct energy weapons. For the record, if they were using direct energy weapons, we wouldn't be able to catch that on photo or video. So that's not how they work. Other than that, just stay frosty, people. Remember that this is everything we thought was coming. It's here now, and trying to become places of solace and knowledge for the people around us is really important. So.
Absolutely. And stay tuned, folks, for amazing more content. I'll be back on tomorrow with Dr. David Morehouse at 2 p.m. live. So be on the lookout for that preview. And I'll be back also next week with my investigation into Love Has Won cult, which goes down very deep and dark rabbit holes. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button. Can you tell people where to find you at, Shane? I'll put your Linktree link in the description.
Yeah, just the Linktree after the / Shane_Sador. You'll find all my links there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone in the chat. Good to see everyone. Thanks for being here. And stay good out there. Stay frosty. Like Shane said. See you guys tomorrow.